Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me. Oh hang on, oh goodness me, I've got feedback coming out my own speakers here. Hold on a second. Hold on. Right, there we go. That's better. What do you expect? Come on, perfection. There's always going to be something wrong. Hopefully you can hear me. I can't see any of your chat. Why is that? Alright, hold on. Let's get the chat up and running. There we go. Can you see me and can you hear me? Let's see what you're saying here. No, I still can't see your chat. Hold on. Right, there we go. I've gotcha. Hello everybody. Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated to everyone for joining. Thank you so much. Yeah, Antonio G, you're demanding perfection. I'm afraid you're at the wrong channel then, mate, if that's what you're after. Frozen picture. Is it frozen? Yeah, it is frozen, isn't it? What's going on there? Why is that? Hold on, let me see if I can fix that. Hold on a second. Hold on. Oh, goodness me. Why is it frozen? Stand by, folks. Very sorry. Stand by. Bear with me. Chat amongst yourselves. I will get round to talking about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in just a moment. Here we go. Let's try that. Hopefully that should unfreeze any second now. Right, I'm going to start chatting anyway, because even if you can't see me, I think you can hear me, which hopefully will be at least part of the solution. Right, let's talk about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. There we go. Oh, now I'm sat right in front of the... how do we get the... This is an absolute nightmare. I really need to get on top of this. There we go. That's a bit better. Now you can sort of see me if I sit over here. Right, that's it. I'm not changing anything else. You get what you get from here on in. Right, Saudi Grand Prix. Definitely wasn't an absolute classic, was it? It wasn't one of the greatest races that I've ever seen. There was enough stuff going on. I was interested all the way through, and that's, I guess, how I always look at Formula One. I look at every race now, and I always see something that keeps me intrigued and interested right to the very end. And it may not be the final result. It may not be, who's going to win the race. Quite frankly, right now we pretty much know it's going to be a Red Bull, as long as they don't have any reliability issues. And we'll get onto that in a moment. But their pace is mind-blowingly fast. Move to the right. Yeah, sorry. Right, I'm going to do that. How about that? I think that should be better. Their pace is ominous. It's blisteringly quick. I mean, Lewis Hamilton said that they have the fastest car that he has ever seen in Formula One, or the most dominant car. I mean, he might have forgotten how dominant he was back in 2014 and beyond. But yes, it's an incredibly dominant car. So we'll talk about all of those things. Fernando Alonso, that penalty that then wasn't a penalty, that then was and wasn't. The Mercedes and the Ferraris, who I thought were blindingly disappointing this weekend. It's one of my biggest disappointments from the weekend was how poor Ferrari were. Mercedes, I think we know that they are really struggling. We're not going to get too much out of them in the short term. But Ferrari, there was a glimmer of hope. They had pace in at least part. We've seen pace through testing. We saw pace in Bahrain on occasions. They had the fragility of the engine, but we saw pace. They just didn't even have any pace this weekend, so it seems like they took a step backwards. So we'll get into all of those things, but I want to go wherever you guys want to go. So hit me up with your questions, and we'll go wherever you want to start it. There you go. Murray Wagnon says, let's go with the 2 5-second penalty, or 2 5-second penalty fiascos in a row. So let's start there. It's as good a place as any. I won't go into too much depth as to why the penalties came. We know why the first one was. He was out of his grid position. We'll talk about it quickly, because many people have said to me, well, he wasn't too far forward, which means, he wasn't getting a head start on everyone else in the race, but he was outside of his box laterally, and they use sensors underneath the car in those grid slots to detect things like jump starts, to measure start reaction times, that kind of thing. And although that doesn't necessarily give him a direct advantage, unless he's completely avoiding the sensor that would allow a jump start. That didn't happen. But it's just a rule that has to be in place to make sure people park their cars in the right spot, to allow the technology the FIA use to measure those jump starts to work. And he didn't do that. And, maybe we start to look at, are these cars more difficult to position? Is there something around the grid slot that they couldn't see? Are the markings painted in the wrong place? Perhaps given we've now got these wheel covers on cars, is that making it harder? Is there something that's causing drivers to do this more frequently, given we've had 2 in 2 races? But the reality is everyone else managed to do it perfectly well. So it probably is just a driver error. They will look at it a bit more closely, I'm sure, and I'm sure given that there's been 2 penalties, we're less likely to see a third because everyone else is going to be a little bit paranoid about it. So that's the first thing. And then we get into the second part of that process where, I'm sure you all know the story now, but the rear jack touched the car whilst the 5-second countdown was going on for serving the 5-second penalty. The teams manage that timing. So there's nothing official from the FIA to start a 5-second clock and allow the team to then start moving. The team manage that 5 seconds. So what typically happens is the car comes to a halt. The team manager will be on the radio literally counting down with a stopwatch in his hand, counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And only at that point can the guys and girls start working on the car. Now, as you all saw, the rear jack touched the car, and that technically, in my understanding, had always been you couldn't touch the car, it would be a penalty. And when he was given a penalty, I thought, yeah, it's a slam dunk. It's a penalty. You're not allowed to touch the car during that 5 seconds. Aston Martin then appealed on a technicality, and actually the way they appealed this is perfectly justifiable. And it's the FIA here who are at fault in not managing their own rules better. The technical wording in the technical regs states that no work can be done on the car during that 5-second period or during the period of a time penalty. There had been an understanding, an agreement, almost a verbal agreement between teams that actually the front jack should be allowed to touch the car because that's how teams, or drivers rather, line up the car in the grid slot. So they use the front jack to perfectly align the car and they use it to come to a halt. So it had been generally agreed and accepted that actually it was okay to have that jack touching the car because the drivers used it to stop in the right place. Aston Martin argued successfully that there was no wording to say that the jack was allowed to be, to touch the car, but there were a number of incidents, and they sent video evidence in of at least 7 other incidents where the jack had been in contact with the car and no penalty had been given. Although they were all front jack incidents, there was nothing to specifically dictate that only the front jack was allowed to touch the car and not the rear jack. And this is a mess that the FIA have, quite frankly, created for themselves by not having properly worded rules and working off a verbal understanding. I mean, which other sport at the very pinnacle of their industry, of their sport, operates on verbal understandings to dictate the rules? It just doesn't happen. The legal system cannot operate like that. So anyone who's a lawyer must have been absolutely laughing their heads off at this discussion going on in Formula One, the very pinnacle of motorsport. So in my opinion, Aston Martin were perfectly within rights to argue the case. It was the correct outcome in the end because it was a successful argument. They showed evidence, which was new evidence that wasn't there available or the stewards hadn't seen when they made their original decision, so it was right to overturn it. The problem was that the rules need to be tightened up and way clearer, and also this whole mess of only referring the incident to the stewards on the final lap, it's just chaotic and it's such a bad look for Formula One. So these incidents need to be got on top of very quickly. They need to be tightened up, sharpened up. There needs to be a bit of an overhaul of exactly how these things are worded. And you're always going to get things that creep through and slip through the net. I know that. But we've had 2 now in 2 races that have happened in similar type situations. And I think it needs looking at. It will be looked at. We know it's going to be looked at. And I have no doubt the rules will be reworded before next race. Right. Let me see what else you're saying. What step do you think Ferrari should take if they have even the slightest chance of getting back to the front? They look like they're third or fourth fastest, from Vanquish 7247. Yeah, I mean, they had a disastrous weekend, quite frankly. The circuit didn't suit their car, but they also showed that they were draggy. Their top speeds were nowhere near what Red Bull were. But actually their overall lap time as well was just down, and they struggled. Charles Leclerc struggled to get past his teammate, but even struggling to keep up with the Mercedes, that we know is a car that's struggling generally with an overall pace deficit, and yet in the middle of that race, for most of that race, Ferrari couldn't get anywhere near them. I mean, I was watching that Grand Prix. Some of you may have seen this if you follow me on Twitter. You may or may not know, and if you don't know, why don't you know? I have my own F1 app. Myself, together with a couple of colleagues, we have developed an app. It's called SeedStream. There's links in all of my YouTube descriptions and socials everywhere. But the SeedStream app has a predictions league in it, where you predict the top 5 finishes in the correct positions ahead of every Grand Prix. And halfway through this Grand Prix, and this has a sign of how, I guess, kind of dull the race was, halfway through this race, I had all 5 predictions in the right place. I'd never done that before. I've never got all 5 right. And that was halfway through. Now, I had zero confidence that it was going to stay the same all the way through to the end. But of course, that's exactly what happened. And the reason it happened was Mercedes had absolutely no answer for the Aston Martin in front of George Russell. Fernando Alonso had enough pace to quite easily maintain third place. The two Mercedes, so they couldn't catch the Aston Martin. The two Mercedes were no match for each other. Lewis couldn't catch George. And then the two Ferraris were quite some way behind the Mercedes and had nothing in response to them either. Now, we all thought Ferrari was a faster car than Mercedes, but not this weekend and not around this circuit. To answer your question of what I think should be done or what Ferrari need to do, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I wonder whether performance was dialed back a little bit because of any engine concerns after the Bahrain Grand Prix, and whether that potentially hurt them. I haven't looked specifically into the data at that, because actually that answer may well be there. Maybe I'll have a look at that over the next couple of days. But they just looked slow, and they've got to get to the bottom of that. So I don't know the answer because I haven't got their data. I haven't got the understanding that they have. But they are a good team. I've criticised Ferrari a lot over recent years because I think they've failed, and they continue to fail with the people, the history, the budgets that they have had, the resource that they've had available to them. They failed with the drivers that they've had coming through their ranks. They have failed. There's no other way to describe it. But they still have all of those elements. They still have great drivers, great people, great resource, and so they should be able to overcome problems like this. Last year, they developed a car that was great. At times, the best car on the grid. And it was more operationally that they let themselves down. This time around, they've got some work to do on the car, but they have the capability to turn that around. So I don't know the answers, but they have to get on top of it quickly. I don't think personally, and neutral Formula One fans might hate to hear this, but I think it's obvious now, I don't think anyone is going to catch Red Bull. In the current climate, in the environment we have where we're so cost restricted, it's just almost impossible to see such a dramatic turnaround. That's how far ahead Red Bull are. In the old days, you could literally design and build a new car and bring it to race 3 if the first one wasn't working. But we can't do that today. And that's potentially a flaw in the modern cost-capped world that we live in Formula One. Should we have some kind of mechanism to allow a team that didn't get it right to catch up? And I don't have all the answers here, but I was thinking about this today. Should there be an emergency fund available for each team, 50 million, let's say, as a random number, which they could only unlock once every 3 years, or they can unlock it once in a 3-year period. So if they design a rubbish car like Mercedes have done, you know, instead of Mercedes having now already to write off the season and accept they are not going to be able to turn things around, and already starting to think heavily about the 2024 car, if they could tap into an emergency fund, could they then use that money to completely revamp their car and get things back on track quickly to keep a championship alive, or to keep some interest at least for the neutrals watching this sport. Just a thought. Let me know what you think. I'm sure there are problems with that. I can understand the immediate thought is that the team that's winning would even want to tap into that 50 million, let's say, every 3 years, just because if it was available, of course they're going to want to do that. So maybe a rule needs to be in place that you can only do it if you're showing a serious deficit percentage-wise in terms of performance to somebody else. I don't know. I haven't figured it out. But as an idea, let me see what you think of that one. Alan Stewart says, hey Mark, I've missed these streams. Thank you, Alan. So have I, mate. Honestly, I missed them. I wasn't able to do them towards the second half of last year just because my schedule was crazy. There may still be times this year where I'm not able to do it every single week. I can already see there's a few weeks coming up where I will literally be on planes around this time, but I will do my very best because I've missed them too. Okay. What else do we... Will Red Bull win every race this season? That is a good question, right? And I know people have been talking about this. I cannot see why not. The only thing that will stop Red Bull winning every race this season is Red Bull. And I say that because they have a car that nobody can get anywhere near. In terms of performance, they just have no competition. Zero competition. The only anomaly that I can see might be somewhere like Monaco, might be somewhere like Singapore. If a driver has an incident or crashes in qualifying and starts further back, at Monaco, even with a very quick car, I think Red Bull would find it very difficult to get to the front. But they've got so much pace in hand that they don't even need to be pushing to the absolute ragged edge to get a lap time out of that car. And that's the kind of comfortability they've got. So in Monaco, whereas normally you need to be hanging it over the ragged edge all the way around the lap, they've got so much pace advantage that they could probably just back off by 0.25% and still stick it at the front of the grid. So what we did see this weekend was some potential fragility, right? Max had a problem, of course, with drive shafts, with gearboxes. We saw that rear its head a little bit in Bahrain as well. He was talking about hearing noises and feeling vibrations during the race. So that will be a concern, because that will stop the car. That's something that, you know, you can't fix it with a switch change. If a drive shaft goes, it's game over. So they will be working hard on that. The nice thing about drive shafts from a team's point of view is there's no restrictions other than your budget restriction. There's no restrictions. You could redesign it. You can bring new ones. You can create as many spares. You can change as many as you want over the weekend. Not like gearboxes and engines that are restricted. So in that sense, they've got a little bit of free play to muck about with. But you get into a race situation, if that vibration or noise had developed into a major problem and Max doesn't finish the race, well, there you go. He's not winning every Grand Prix of this season. But they have genuinely so much pace advantage that I cannot see why that won't happen unless they mess it up for themselves. Right. Emergency fund would be used tactically and planned rather than an emergency. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly why I say there has to be some mechanism that means you could only use it if your performance dictates it. And I don't know how we would word that, but it needs some figuring out. But as an idea, it's just an idea that at the moment the cost cap, and I'm all for the cost cap, by the way, which I never thought I would be in the beginning, but I do think it's already starting to level the playing field, and that has to be a good thing. But it's also just starting to show up a few problems, and Mercedes is the best example of this. Mercedes, an incredible team, again, incredible people and resource and everything else, but they've created a car that doesn't work, and there is no way out of that. So they're now faced with a season of having a car that doesn't work. Now, from a Formula One perspective, there's no entertainment there. There's no show. You know, there is no way that they can claw that pace back and find themselves back at the front without being able to spend more money. And Formula One has always had that. If you need to get yourself out of trouble, you've had to spend a bit more money. Yes, of course, I want innovation. We want to create your way out of trouble by coming up with ideas. But in the modern era of Formula One, that still takes money. And so the idea of having an emergency fund is that you would figure out a way to unlock it, and the time frames and the reasons why it might be unlocked. But I think to have something like that might be a way to keep the season alive Whereas at the moment, I already know people who are switching off this season because they know who's going to win. Having said that, it is still difficult. I mean, Sergio Perez, genuinely, although Max was hampered through his qualifying escapades, in the race, Checo had the pace over him. I mean, I think if Max had been at the front at the front of the start of the race, he'd have probably walked away with it. He would have definitely destroyed tyres at a faster rate than Checo working his way through the field. So there's all those caveats. But Checo did a decent job this weekend. Terrible start to the Grand Prix, and he needs to get those fixed. But he did a decent job. So there could well be, and I talked about this on the SeedStream app earlier today, in fact, the one thing that Formula One will be relying on, and I've already seen a few of you talking about it, is a rivalry between Checo and Max. If that can be bubbled up, and we saw glimpses into it already yesterday, and I thought that was interesting. I don't know about you, but I thought that was interesting that we already saw glimpses of those two. Well, no love lost between the two. Let's put it that way. I thought it was interesting, the sort of power play that Max did when he came into the cool-down room, straight past Checo, puts his helmet down, walks straight over, says congratulations to Fernando, and then just sits back down the chair. Not a word to Checo. That's telling. And then Checo's intrigue as to how he managed to get fastest lap on the last lap of the race. There was also frustration in Checo's voice and in his face while he was saying those things. And did you see Jos Verstappen at the end of the race in Parc Fermé, when Checo jumped out the car, was celebrating with the Red Bull team? The steely, icy look. No emotion from Jos Verstappen. And, you know, it's a shame on one hand because it's not classy. He could have done better. He could have definitely, little smile, a little tap on the shoulder is all it would have taken, but he didn't do that. And that, I think, is a problem that a lot of people have with the Verstappens. But the upside of all of that is that could easily develop into a rivalry. And I know through 2007, through seasons when my two drivers have been their only and biggest rivals, that's when things turn bitter and ugly. And that is the only thing potentially at the front of the field that Formula One might be able to cling on to this year. If those two drivers can keep it tight, can keep close enough to each other on regular occasions, that will get ugly. And from an entertainment perspective, that's great. From a team perspective, it's horrible. I can tell you that for nothing. But from an entertainment perspective, that could keep things alive. We saw it at Mercedes with Lewis and Nico. We saw it at my team at McLaren with Lewis and Fernando back in the day. And we could well potentially see that with Max and Checo. Other than that, though, they are out in a league of their own. Right. Let's see. Sorry, but they cut part of the scene. He congratulated Checo. I'm not saying he didn't congratulate Checo. I'm sure he did. Of course he did. I'm not saying Max didn't do that. But in that cool-down room, there was tension. And that's what I'm saying. That is the first glimmer, the first signs that there might be tension between the two. And it will only grow if the rivalry on track and in a championship context starts to grow as well. And Ricardo's waiting in the back of the garage, says Pepsi Maxi. Yeah, he's absolutely too true. Right, where should we go next? Will the FIA bring new rules in to rein in Red Bull like they did with Marc? I doubt it, says Nutcracker. Well, I don't know. And actually, I wouldn't write that off. I don't think it's going to happen halfway through a season. But I do think, and this is exactly what I'm talking about here, they already have brought rules in to peg back the leaders. Look, I'm not complaining about Red Bull in any way, because actually we need to celebrate what they've done. We've got to take our hats off. It's an incredible achievement to produce a car like the one they've produced. It's absolutely a stonking piece of machinery. And that is the work of hundreds and hundreds of brilliant people up in Milton Keynes to create that. Take nothing away from them. That's what every team is trying to do. And it's Red Bull that have managed to do it. And of course, as soon as they do that, everyone starts to complain. In terms of the rules, the FIA have already put rules in place to hamper the teams that have done well. So Red Bull are already facing those restrictions this year, having won the championship last year. They get less wind tunnel time and less aerodynamic research time through CFD. That's significant. The problem is, for Formula One at least, or for neutral fans, Red Bull have done such a good job already, they can now afford to take that penalty and not be hampered. In any other season, had they been much closer to other rivals, that system that the FIA have put into place would absolutely work and work in the favour of the likes of Ferrari or Mercedes and pull back Red Bull a little bit. It's just that Red Bull have beaten the system by creating such a good car this year. Whether they change rules in the future, well, this is what I'm talking about with things like budget cap. Potentially that's something. Not designed to just peg back Red Bull, because I don't think that's fair, but to peg back somebody who's pulled ahead in such a way that the sport starts to suffer. It's a real dilemma, and I know from being in a team that feels incredibly unfair. And it would have felt unfair for Mercedes. It felt unfair for us at McLaren when we were in those situations. You've done a great job. You've smashed it. You set out with a challenge and a target in mind. You smashed your target. You feel like you should just be giving each other a pat on the back and reaping the rewards of that great work. And yet the rest of the world is talking about, how can we change the rules to peg them back a bit? How can we bring them back? How can we close up the field? How can we give the others a helping hand? That feels incredibly unfair, because all you're saying inside the team is, well, why didn't they just do as good a job as us? And there's absolute truth in that. But there is this other side of the coin, which is that Formula One's an entertainment spectacle. It has to have eyeballs on it, otherwise the whole model falls apart. And I don't think we're close to losing too many eyeballs yet, but it will start to happen. And Formula One needs to be entertaining to keep that growth going that's going at such an incredible rate. So that has to be a seriously important factor. What are your thoughts on Russell ignoring team orders? Good question, that from Boy Oh Boy. I thought, well, look, ultimately, George Russell was proved to be correct. He made the right decision, didn't he? Because he was given a little bit of misinformation from his team, or he wasn't given the information that he wanted about Fernando Alonso's penalty. And when he was given the information, he stuck his foot down and he managed to eke out a lead to the point that Lewis just simply wasn't able to match. Now, if they'd switched those cars, it may well have very quickly ended up that Lewis was holding back George and the team would have lost out. So I've always got this dilemma, of course, because I think like a Formula One team, and if a Formula One team tells its drivers that they want to switch position, then a driver in my book should do that. But however, you also have to take on board the information that a driver's giving you. You've got to temper it, because a driver will always say, I'm quicker than him, I can go faster, I don't want to move over. But I think in that situation, given there was a little bit of missing information on George's part, actually George got it right on that occasion, and it was the best thing for the team. Lewis wasn't as quick. He was on that different tyre and he struggled. And so, yeah, fair play to George in such an early stage of his Mercedes career for standing up to the team, I guess, to some extent, and knowing his own mind, knowing what potentially he had still left in the car, and then executing and delivering upon it. So, yeah, well done to George, I guess. Right, shall we get into... I was trying to hold off, but there's no way we can go all the way through today without talking about McLaren. So JP Stone says, McLaren is weird. They should be so much quicker than they are. I feel bad for Lando, as he's a talented driver. And I cannot disagree with anything you say there, JP Stone. McLaren, hugely disappointing. I mean, they were fighting for last place at the end of that race, and that is not where McLaren should be. Not just because they're McLaren. I don't believe any team has a God-given right to be at the front. But I know the work that's gone in at McLaren. I know the rebuilding, the gradual rebuilding over many years. From, they were last place back in the Honda days, and that was seen as rock bottom. And it's taken them a long time to put people in place, to put systems in place. I mean, look, I know this because I do have a slightly special insight into this team, into this company. I know a lot of what's gone on in the background, and it's all commendable stuff. It's all been done for very good reason. It's all been done in kind of really scientific or structured way with all of the right outcomes in mind. And they've been getting closer and closer. But this year they have got it wrong. Ultimately, what they've got wrong, a bit like Mercedes, is they've got the car wrong. They got some fundamental issue with the car wrong, and they've recognised that and are now having to try and retrieve it. But in the same way I'm talking about Mercedes, you can't just do that super quickly. There are budget constraints that restrict how much you can do. And I think although McLaren are slightly ahead of Mercedes in terms of how early they recognise the problems with their car, and we're going to see upgrades and fixes hopefully coming much sooner to McLaren than we will at Mercedes, they are still languishing at the back of the field. Teams like Williams are now very clearly ahead of them. And that, again, no disrespect to Williams. Total respect, in fact, for what they've achieved. Alex Albon got out of his car yesterday, even though it broke down, and said it was the fastest car he's had since he's been at Williams. You know, he was in a good place. That team is in a good place. I've got massive amount of respect for James Vowles, a guy that's never been team principal before, but I think has all the right attributes to be very good in that role. I think I said that last week. I have high hopes for him. I think he's a great appointment, a lot of time for the guy, and I think he will do well there. But McLaren are now being measured against the teams at the very, very back of the grid. And that's not where they should be. There are actually sort of 3 clear groups, really, or 4 if you put Red Bull in their own, which they are. There's a team at the back of the group, which is sort of McLaren, Haas, although they had a decent race actually yesterday, AlphaTauri, or Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo had they didn't have a good day yesterday, did they? But and then there's that midfield group, which includes the rest. And I put McLaren yesterday, at least, in that rearward group, not in the mid pack, which includes, of course, things like Alpine. Probably AlphaTauri in there, actually. Would have said McLaren. Aston Martin are now joining the top 3. I guess Aston Martin absolutely joining the top 3. Mercedes are in that midfield pack. The top 3, and I say top 3, I mean Aston Martin, Ferrari, and then probably Red Bull out on their own. But McLaren are very much towards the back of that pack. And that's hugely disappointing given the amount of work that's gone in. However, I do see it as a blip. I don't see the team having huge fundamental sort of operational issues. There are definitely things that I think can still be improved. But I think they are working in the right direction. But they've got to get the car right, as everybody does. It's an obvious thing to say. But that's the next step on their progression, their step up the ladder towards progression. And that car, I think, is coming for Baku, so fingers crossed. Midfield battles the competition to watch, says Connor McTapp. It is, and it's really quite interesting at times, isn't it? Yesterday wasn't great in terms of racing. It just wasn't. It was a very difficult circuit to overtake on. Incredibly low tyre deg, which meant that we weren't sort of multiple stopping and different strategies. So difficult race to judge too much on yesterday. We got Melbourne up next, which also isn't always the greatest spectacle of a Grand Prix, although I love the place, I love the event. So it might be a couple of races really until we get a very clear picture. It's still quite muddy and a little bit all over the place. Quite a small data set, just 2 races. And as I said, Saudi's a little bit of a sort of strange one anyway. So let's give it a few races and then we'll get a much clearer picture of exactly where everyone lies. And when we start getting upgrades coming through, how effective are they going to be to change that? Right, let's... where else do we want to go? Oscar's putting pressure on Lando. Yeah, Oscar Piastri, let's talk about him quickly. I thought a decent start to his Formula 1 career at McLaren. He's certainly not put himself to shame, and I think measuring yourself against someone like Lando, who's now very comfortable in the team and in the car, is a tough place to be measured. But also, if you manage to sort of stand up to him and you manage to put pressure on him, which somebody just said there, sorry, it's gone now, then that's a pretty good representation of yourself in just your second Grand Prix. He will grow into that as the car develops. It may well develop towards him and he'll get more comfortable with it. And I think that's a really good place to be. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Oscar Piastri. I think a lot of people around that paddock do as well. So there was a lot of hype around him coming into Formula 1, and so far he hasn't let people down. Ferrari were very fast at Melbourne last season. Yes, they were. It's going to be interesting, Melbourne. I don't quite know. I still think Red Bull will be miles ahead of everybody because they've got everything. That car has everything. It's got incredible top speed, but it also seems to have all the grip through the corners. It's not tearing through tyres at an alarming rate, so It's kind of got everything. It's the holy grail of Formula One cars, which is pretty impressive, isn't it? But not what people want to hear. But Ferrari, yeah, they may well come back. It may well be that Saudi was an anomaly for them, but they've definitely got work to do. And if they have still got some engine gremlins in the background and they're not quite 100% sure or confident what happened in Bahrain or a way of preventing it happening again, it may well be they're not as sure of themselves to really crank things up to the maximum power levels that they tried out first Grand Prix. So we'll see. Red Bull DRS pace. Yeah, that's an interesting topic, wasn't it? Red Bull very clearly, and I have looked at the data trace, when you compare top speeds with DRS open, or the difference between top speeds with DRS open and top speeds without. I mean, Red Bull are fast anyway, faster than everyone else anyway, but when they open the DRS, it's an enormous chunk. It was about 15 kilometers an hour along the main straight in Saudi Arabia when DRS was opened. And what that means essentially is that when the rear wing flap opens, of course, what it does is it dumps the downforce that you don't need because you're going down a straight. Downforce also comes with drag. So when you open the flap, you dump downforce and drag, which means that if you were to go through a corner in that state, you'd have no grip over the rear wheels and you'd spin off out of, into the barriers. But when you're going down a straight, you don't need downforce because you're going straight. And so you want to dump the drag for top speed. That's what it's all about. What the Red Bull rear wing does, seemingly, is it is able to dump more drag than anyone else. Now, the size of that rear wing flap is, of course, determined in the regulations. They can't just make a bigger one and open it up to allow more drag and downforce to disappear. That's not allowed. But what you can do is create a flap that's of the regulation size, but has, with the airflow passing over the rear end of the car, and particularly passing over that ring and over that wing, and the way that gets that rear wing is the way that it's channeled over other elements of the car, side pods, bodywork, around the roll hoop, all those kind of areas, all dictate how much airflow ends up at the rear wing. It seems like they have used a rear wing or created a rear wing design that is generating so much downforce in that area that when they open the flap, it has more to dump, more of that downforce and drag to dump away, even though the flap is still the same size. So I'm talking about the pressure differential on that wing. When they open the flap, the pressure differential is greater than perhaps other cars, and therefore they dump more downforce and drag, and that increases the speed at an even higher level. So, I mean, that's speculation. I'm guessing it's my interpretation of what's happening, but it's a very clear difference between Red Bull and others. And so DRS for them is incredibly powerful. And that was another reason why in Saudi, where you have those two DRS zones along straights, particularly the start-finish straight, having DRS was an incredible addition to your performance package if you're in a Red Bull. So we saw how quickly they just blasted past other cars. So that was kind of scary at times, the pace differential they had. But I guess, again, just a bit of great design from Red Bull and something that we need to take our hats off to and celebrate to some extent. Let me see. What do you think about the addition of Bernie Collins to the Sky team? I like her thinking, says Ruben Aarons. Yeah, great appointment. I have a lot of time for anyone who's worked in the sport at the highest level, anyone who's worked behind the scenes, and I've been saying this for years, and I've worked at Sky both on screen and behind the scenes at Sky for a number of years. I was banging on about it for years because it's the one thing that they never seem to address in their coverage. And I don't just mean Sky. I mean anyone covering Formula One rarely ever employs the skill set and the knowledge and the experience of somebody other than a driver who's works behind the scenes. And, I know from my own experience how valuable that is. So I'm really pleased that they have signed up Bernie, and I thought she was great over the weekend. Added a really nice layer to the existing coverage, because a Formula One team member thinks differently. I don't care how good any of the pundits are a Formula One team member sees things differently, thinks differently to the way a driver does, or a pundit who's been around doing it for years. So great that they've recognised that. Great that as viewers we all get to enjoy that. And I think it's an excellent additional layer to the coverage. So I hope that continues. And, it'd be great to see more people from teams behind the scenes getting their opinions shared and listened to and valued as part of Formula One's coverage. I'm a huge supporter of it. I've tried to celebrate that from my perspective for many years. I've had my opportunities with Sky and with other broadcasters, continue to, very grateful for them, but I always think it's and maybe I'm biased, clearly I'm biased, but maybe there's it's some additional perspective than that of a driver, and I think that's important to have. Right, Sibulka says hit the like button, and they are absolutely correct. Please hit the like button. That would be great. I appreciate that. Right. Quite impressed with Logan Sargent so far. His deleted lap in quali made no sense to me. Yes. So Alan Stewart, I agree. I think he has done a decent job as well. The assumption, and it's often the assumption with drivers who come in at the back of the field, particularly ones that come from money, and he's an American driver when there's a huge push to really crack America with Formula One. There was an assumption that that's the only reason he was there, and I think he has blown that assumption out the water, rightly so. I think he's been good. He has on occasions matched Alex Albon, and Alex we know is a very good driver, and I have a lot of time for Alex Albon, by the way. I think he's a hugely undervalued driver. Had a bad experience at Red Bull, but he was highly rated by a lot of people in and around the sport before that. I think he still has today. And Logan Sargent is shaping up very nicely against him. So I think actually he's got a bright future, and I can't wait to see it play out. Oh, are you still with me? I've got a scrolling wheel of death on the screen. Hold on. Hopefully you're still there. Right, I'll carry on anyway, and hopefully you can hear me. Lance Stroll has improved as a driver. Discuss. Agreed. I do agree. I think Lance Stroll is a decent driver. I think he's been a decent driver for quite some time, and now that he's got a good car, he will only get better and better. His confidence will grow and grow and grow. Everything's frozen. Hold on, I'm just gonna. Oh, hang on. Are we still there? Oh, God. Hold on. Right, hello, are you still there? Oh yeah, you can still see me. Okay, might have been my end, don't know, frozen, yeah. Okay, we're back. Where were we talking? Logan Sargent, yeah, a lot of time for the guy. I think he's done very well. Imagine coming into Formula One with people making those assumptions and with that pressure over you, and he's delivered. So total respect for that. Well done. Right. Okay, back in the day, one of the best for perspective from the garage was Gary Anderson with Eurosport after his time with Jordan GP. Yeah, Gary knows his stuff. Again, it's just that perspective I think is important. So, that's my opinion on it. I do think so. Right. That's YouTube for you, yeah. I'm invited to the Las Vegas GP paddock club ticket and I can't go, says Kiwi. What? You've been invited to the Las Vegas GP paddock club and you can't go? Man, that hurts. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry for you, my friend. That is going to be one heck of an event. I'm actually going this year to the Miami Grand Prix, and believe it or not, it's the first time ever I'm going to a Formula One race as a fan. How cool is that? I've literally never been as a fan. I've never sat in the grandstands. I've never been without going there for work, without being on someone else's timetable. And I'm going as a fan. There's me and my wife and some friends going over. And I cannot wait. I'm so excited to be there and see it from a fan's perspective, which seems so strange having been involved in this sport for so many years. but it's seeing it from the other side, and I'm just really pleased that I get the opportunity to do that. So I can't wait. Miami, here I come. If you're going to be there, give us a shout. Right, where else can we go? Can Red Bull's cost cap penalty help other teams catch up this year? Could Alonso win the World Drivers' Championship? It's not that much of a penalty, no. Yeah, their penalties, as I said earlier, there's the penalty of their aero restrictions, and their cost cap penalty. It's not enough because they've created such a good car. So the car out the box is so far ahead that even if they stopped any development now, I still reckon that if they did nothing to that car and just ran it, maintained it and serviced it to the end of the season, I still think they would be definitely at the front and in contention, if not still winning by the last round of the championship. And that's partly because it's so dominant right now, but also we don't get the same rate of development that we had in previous years because of the cost cap that everyone is under. So they could probably stop right now and still walk away with this championship. That's amazing. Right. You lucky sod, Marc, says Nutcracker. Yeah, I am very lucky and I very much appreciate it. Right. Let's get another one. What will Netflix do with little drama? Oh, there'll still be drama. I think that's the thing. There's definitely drama, and there's going to be drama throughout this season all the way through. I have no doubt about that. It may not be for the starts, for the championship, unless the two Red Bull guys can stay in contention with each other. But I think there'll be rivalries. I've already talked about the one inside that garage. There's going to be people jostling for new drives. Positions. We've got Daniel Ricciardo, who will not be happy being a third driver for very long. Could he benefit from a massive falling out between drivers in the race seats right now? Who knows? How long is Lando Norris going to stick around at McLaren? I know he's contracted for next year, but those conversations will already start to happen. Lewis Hamilton, is he going to sign another contract at Mercedes? Given that there's no great light at the end of this tunnel right now. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Who knows? So I think there's still enough drama. There's still enough going on in the background of Formula One. And look, hey, it's Netflix. If there's not enough drama, they'll create it. All right. Look at Braun GP. They didn't develop their car. Yeah, exactly. And that's very similar situation, isn't it? They had so much of an advantage. The difference then was the trick that gave them the advantage was very easy for others to then go ahead and come up with their own version of. There was no cost cap restriction back then. Right. How is Aston able to get new Red Bull staff and not McLaren? I don't think staff is McLaren's problem. McLaren have a great lineup in terms of technical and operational personnel. They have a few people that have moved around within that team. There's been a bit of a restructure recently, but all in a good way. All good people. A lot of people that have been there for a long time, a lot of very experienced people, and they've got people that have joined. So McLaren are not in a situation where they are really struggling for staff. I think, look, I don't want to be too brutal and harsh on anybody, any team in all honesty, but like any team, and I hate to say this because it's my team, but at McLaren, like Ferrari, they've gone for a very long time now, without having the success that team has always been synonymous with. How long can that go on with the existing setup and regime? And I'm not directly pointing fingers at anybody, but this is just the nature of business in general, let alone Formula One. The system hasn't worked for a long time. We are missing success at McLaren. There are people at that team, a lot of people at that team, who've never won a Grand Prix. Some of them will have that one experience where they got the Grand Prix win with Daniel Ricciardo at Monza, but that's the only one. Many of them have never won a championship or even been in contention. Some of them have their experience of working in Formula One at McLaren as being at the back of the grid or in the middle of the grid. but never at the front of the grid. And that changes your mentality. And you know me, I continue to do a lot of work in this field about mentality and how we maintain it, how we improve it, how we develop it, how we get the right mentality to win. And it's not by running around at the back of the field for most of your career. So that's a concern, and it is a concern. It's the same kind of concern that Ferrari will be having and have had, continue to have, and the structure is changing there, as we know. I wonder how long at McLaren things will keep going under the same kind of structure. That's just a thought I'm throwing out there. Having said that, at McLaren, the one thing I would say is they have been on this trajectory towards success. This I'm seeing as a blip, and if they can overcome this and get back on that same path, well, then they are heading back in the right direction. So I don't want to be too harsh, but it's a results business, and unfortunately they've not had results for a very long time. Where's Josh Smith gone? He's normally always here. Greg says Greg Smith. Are you two related? Absolutely though, yeah. Josh Smith is a very familiar name in the chat, and I can't see him. Where are you, Josh? Right. Should Zach go? I knew someone would ask it. I mean, that's what I was tiptoeing around the edge of there. I have nothing personally against Zach Brown. I think he's been incredible on a marketing front, and that's been a real success story for McLaren, is the marketing side. And actually, you could argue he's done an even better job of selling the marketing on that car, even when they haven't been getting results. That's been really impressive. But, it is still got to be centred around results, and they haven't had them. So normally, the guy at the top of the tree ultimately becomes responsible after a period of time. But I'm glad that he's given time. I'm glad he's been given time, and I'm glad that people are recognising that the team has improved consistently year on year under his rule, under his reign, and hopefully this is just a blip. But nobody's going to be patient forever, that's for sure. There are shareholders and investors of that team that need to see results, so collectively they have to deliver them. Is Mini Elvis with us tonight, or is he in bed? He is definitely in bed tonight, that's for sure. Piastri would have taken points if Gasly hadn't smashed the wing off. Yeah, well, everyone's got a story like that in a race. A street circuit, particularly around the start, it's always messy. And actually, it was less messy than I thought it was going to be. But yes, I mean, probably fairly true. Marc, do you think the Aston crew can keep their head cool? It's been so long at the back end of the grid. Yeah, that's another good point in the same kind of vein that we were just talking there. Aston Martin now find themselves in a position that they're quite unfamiliar with. Although they're not winning races yet, and potentially they might still find that hard with Red Bull in the game, they are up at the leading edge. And it brings a little bit of pressure, but because they're in a sort of field of their own right now, certainly with Fernando, I guess the pressure's a little bit less. At the moment, there's no major competition. Aston Martin are in this little league of their own, behind Red Bull, who are in a complete league of their own, and then behind them it looks like we've got a Ferrari and Mercedes that are reasonably closely matched. I think that will change. Those three teams, I'm sure, will change back and forwards a little bit as the season goes on, but it will be interesting. But I think they're getting a sort of gentle introduction without too much pressure of operating at the front of the grid, and that's probably a nice way to do it. What do you think about De Vries's performance? I think he's done okay. He's had a lot of bad luck in terms of reliability, didn't he, this weekend? But yeah, I think he's done all right. I don't think he's embarrassed himself at all. I think he needs a bit more time, as everybody does. We're 2 races in, and he's missed half of one race weekend. So yeah, he's done well enough, I think, to justify his position. He's a good driver, I know that. So he needs a little bit more time, and we'll come back to reassess him a bit later. AlphaTauri's been abysmal. Yes, you're right. I mean, yes, that's their biggest problem, obviously, and his too. What's your favourite livery this year? Favourite livery? I actually, and you'll hate me for saying this, I like the Alfa Romeo. I was going to say Red Bull, because I do like the Red Bull livery. Even though it's kind of boring now because we've seen it for so many years, it's still a good livery, I think. But actually, Alfa Romeo, I like that one. That's a cool looking car. Right, 5 minutes to go. How can the lower teams compete without more money? Well, that is exactly the point of the cost cap, isn't it? The cost cap has brought the gap between the front of the field and the back of the field down to very little now. Yes, I'm sure there are still certain teams, Haas, for example, who are operating maybe below the budget cap, but not by anywhere near as much as used to be the case. So that's how they compete. This new rule is designed to do exactly that, and I'm already thinking we're seeing results from that perspective. And over time, over the next few years, that should really consolidate itself into a much tighter, closely packed field. That's the hope, at least. Thoughts on the future? Andretti, Ford, GM, Audi. Great stuff that these manufacturers, these big names, are coming into the sport. The Ford operation is, I guess, a sort of badging operation. It's going to be more than that, but largely it's a badging operation. But still, shows they want to be involved. The one I'm really intrigued about is Audi. I think Audi don't do things by halves in motorsport. We know how well they attacked the whole Le Mans program and how successful that was. I think they will come at it with the same sense of giving it everything. I'll be very intrigued to see if Lando Norris potentially ends up there, with Andreas Seidel already moving over to run that operation. If McLaren can't deliver for Lando Norris, would he be tempted to go to a manufacturer like Audi and lead their program? I can see it happening. That could be an exciting prospect for fans. So Audi is something I'm very much intrigued to see, and could be a really good, strong addition to the field for Formula One. So that's exciting. 24 cars on track would be awesome. It would, although, do you not think that with the troubles that we have at some old school circuits, with the giant Formula One cars we have now, adding another 4 cars onto the grid would be so congested at some places, wouldn't it? I do think that would introduce its own problems. Apart from that, I'm with you. More cars means greater competition, but I think we need to do something about either circuits or car sizes or both. Right, 3 minutes to go. Where do you want to see an F1 race? Says Thomas Pacheco. South Africa. Want to go back? I'd love it to go back to South Africa. I don't mind. I honestly don't mind. I think it's. I want to see an F1 race go to countries where there is a clear passion for Formula One. I love going to Japan because, yes, the circuit's great, but the fans are amazing. The culture around Formula One's brilliant. Places that love the sport. When we go to Canada, the event is huge. It's way bigger than just the race. It becomes a festival for the whole weekend. The city is taken over by Formula One, and those are the kind of places that really embrace it and make it much more than just a race. That's where I love to see Formula One go, where it's appreciated and where there's already a giant fan base, because that's what we should be doing, taking the sport to the fans. So I know that South Africa would be brilliant. I know we've been there in the past, but I think it would be a cool place. But there's also many others too. Kyalami, yeah. Lots of suggestions here then, yeah. Kyalami, Phillip Island, yeah, that would be cool too. Could Audi be successful setting up shop somewhere other than the UK Motorsport Valley? They could. It's definitely not out of the question that they don't need to be in Motorsport Valley anymore. In the old days, you had to be in the middle of Motorsport Valley in the UK because the sort of the subculture, the suppliers and the subcontractors that Formula One teams all used were all there. Well, today, almost all of it's brought in-house, so you don't need that element to the same level. You can be anywhere as long as you've got the right facilities. The one place in Formula One where it hampers you is bringing staff in to come and work for you. Because if you're going to go and be abroad somewhere, you've got to tempt people out of the UK, because that's where most of the Formula One talent pool is. You've got to tempt people out of the UK and ask them to go and relocate and move to another country. And there's nothing wrong with that. That can be a wonderful experience, but it's another hurdle to get over if you want to acquire the best people. So that's potentially where it can hurt somebody. Right, guys, we're at the end. That's it. It's 11 o'clock. Thank you for joining, although it's an hour later. This will have to be the time for the next few weeks because Wheeler Dealers, which was on just before this evening, has just started tonight. So a brand new series. If you watched it, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. That'll be on every Monday at 9 p.m. on Discovery Channel, which means straight afterwards we will be here when there's a Grand Prix on at 10 p.m. on a Monday trying to do this. And if you're willing to do that at that time, I will be here for you. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate all of you. If you haven't checked out my podcast this week, please do so. The Pit Lane Life Lessons podcast. If you haven't checked it out, that's what it's called. Go subscribe, go listen, and please tell your friends. It's a real passion project of mine, and I'd love you guys to be part of it too. In the meantime, check out and download the SeedStream app for all of your Formula 1 news and content, including exclusive stuff from me, and get involved in the SeedStream Predictions League for the next race in Melbourne. Have a wonderful week, folks. I'll see you very soon. Ta-da.